Front and Center. Front and Center. A focus on important and significant developments affecting the lives of Filipinos, not only in the Philippines, but also those living and working around the world. Join us in Front and Center. Front and Center. Here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service.
Good day, welcome to Front and Center, where we focus on developments in the Philippines, legislation that provides policies and directions that strives to promote a better economy for the country, issues that concern the welfare and well-being of every Filipino. All of these and more will be Front and Center. You can watch this program live on our Facebook page, that's Radyo Pilipinas World Service, and you can hear us as well on our live audio streaming, that's on Evox PBS Receiver app. So join us for another edition of Front and Center with your host, Jerome Toledo. And let's focus on the economy as the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas Monetary Board on Thursday decided to reduce its target reverse repurchase or RRP rate, or also known as the policy interest rate, by 25 basis points to 5.50%. The interest rates on the overnight deposit and lending facilities were accordingly adjusted to 5.0% and 6.0% respectively. The latest inflation forecasts, the central bank said, have declined from the forecasts of the February policy meeting. The risk-adjusted inflation forecast for 2025 fell from 3.5% to 2.3%, while the forecast for 2026 declined from 3.7% to just 3.3%. And meanwhile, the risk-adjusted inflation forecast for 2027 stands at 3.2%. So the inflation expectations also remain within the target. And to help us discuss this latest rate cut, we have again the Chief Economist of the Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, Mr. Michael Ricafort. Michael, thank you for joining us in the program.
Good morning, Mr. Jerome, and to your viewers.
Okay,
Nice to be
so,
back.
all right, thank you. And for the benefit of our listeners and viewers, Michael, what is the policy rate cut in simple definition?
Well, that's the key interest rate in the country, primarily. The key tool used by the central bank to, well, as for monetary policy, meaning to say, if inflation is going up, they tend to raise interest rates to control inflation, because that's their primary mandate. If inflation goes down or if economic conditions are softer, they may opt to bring down interest rates to stimulate more economic growth. So that's their main lever. That's their main variable that they use. Interest rates. They bring it high when inflation is up. They bring it down when inflation is under control and when the economic conditions warrant further growth. So yeah, for instance, during the pandemic, when economic growth and economic conditions were soft, they cut interest rates to record low of 2%. Now, for the past 3 years since the Russia-Ukraine war, when inflation became a problem to the world, so they raised it from the record low of 2 to as high as 6.5%. Last time we saw that was August 14 of last year. And now they have reduced it already by a total of 100 basis points. It's now down to 5.5%. That's the lowest in more than 2 years, since November of 2022.
I see.
So they have cut it already because inflation is under control. The central banks around the world, the Fed, the BSP, and the other central banks, they have successfully brought down inflation emanating from the Russia-Ukraine war more than 3 years ago. And commodity prices have gone down. Oil, name it, sugar, soybean, wheat, and many other major global commodities. They're now at their lowest in 3 to 4 years.
I see. And that's right.
Even before the Trump tariff, because of they deliberately raise interest rates to engineer the slowdown in the economy. to slow
Yeah.
to slow down demand, and commodities went down as a result.
I see.
So
Okay.
that's the main tool, interest rate.
Okay.
So it's very important if we cut interest rates, that's good for the economy
Yeah. And
because
and also,
go ahead.
Michael,
Okay,
yeah,
sure.
sorry. BSP Governor Remolona has said yesterday, upon the announcement of the policy rate cut, the inflation has been or has contained so far. So, what will be the immediate effect of policy rate cut in our economy as well as our stock market, Michael?
It's good for the economy whenever the central bank cuts rates because it would bring down the borrowing costs for businesses, for households, consumers, and other institutions. So it would encourage more demand for loans and credit. It would create more investments, new expansion projects, more jobs, and more business and economic activities whenever there's a cut in interest rates. Because inflation is already manageable locally. And you know, so but we have challenges now, like yeah, the Trump tariffs. So it could slow down world economic growth. It could slow things down again. And well, the problem with that in the US, actually, the problem there, as Trump raises tariffs, so it would increase the prices in the US paid for by the Americans. It would lead to higher inflation there, some pickup in. Although the latest inflation data in the States is benign, surprisingly. Although, of course, we cannot be complacent about it because Trump just started the reciprocal tariffs last April too. So the latest inflation data in the States only that well that reflected as of March. Although the US already started raising tariffs on Canada, on Mexico, and on China last March 4. But nonetheless, inflation remained lower, surprisingly. So that's kind of well, it's a surprise. It's a pleasant surprise. But now, everybody's on a wait and see. Even the U.S. central bank officials are still assessing. It's still uncertain if the because imagine the reciprocal tariffs very high. It just happened that Trump suspended it for 90 days.
All
There's a
right.
pause in the tariff, just maintaining it at a minimum of 10% tariff for everybody else. And last April to it varies. Philippines was 17%, second to the lowest after Singapore's
Right.
10%.
Uh-huh.
Vietnam was 46%, China was 34%, and Japan was 24%. But
I see.
now,
Yeah.
even if many countries are at 10% for 90 days, there's a retaliatory
Oh.
trade war between China and the US.
Right.
Well, Trump again raised the tariff on China to
And
145%.
right. All right.
So yeah, imagine that's why it could if there's inflation in the US
And it's becoming
starting April.
and Mike, it's becoming an economic factor that affects or that may trigger a rate cut, uh, particularly this rate cut that I'm sorry, the tariff rate that Trump administration imposes to countries.
Yeah, that's a signal that Trump is kind of worried also because the stock markets have been going down almost 20% from the record highs last February. So suddenly he came up with that decision. Okay, the stock markets recovered a bit, but it's still volatile though. And among 1 week highs, but they're still hovering among the lowest in like 8 months since August of last year. So yeah, it's already affecting the pockets of investors, the retirees, the 401ks. So, what would complicate the monetary policy there in the States? If there's a pickup in inflation, that could mean the Federal Reserve may not be able to cut interest rates as much. And we would follow the Federal Reserve for the coming months. That's our future cue. Now, because now, the latest cut by the BSP, the 25 basis points cut yesterday to 5.5%, the total interest rate cut by the BSP is already 100 basis points from 6.5 to 5.5 since August 15 of last year. That is already the same as the total cut by the US Central Bank by the Federal Reserve. That's 100 basis points. So, yeah, at least the interest differential is maintained. We cannot go ahead of the Fed. we need to maintain that 100 basis point interest differential.
I
The
see.
Fed now is 4.5%, the BSP is at 5.5%. Uh, yeah, now going forward for the coming months, whatever the Fed does, if it's going to cut rates,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, if based on their assessment on the tariffs by Trump, the inflationary impact of which would be considered,
Mm-hmm.
then that's and well, if the Fed cuts rate in the coming months, that's the only time that the BSP could follow
Mm-hmm.
again.
I see.
So, and yeah, the BSP has been dovish. They said they
Uh-huh.
would cut a few more times this
Okay.
year. Series of 0.25 baby steps or baby cuts of 0.25 each. And the earlier signal, they may cut even before this
Mm-hmm.
latest meeting, the signals by monetary authorities, monetary officials locally that they may cut between 50 to 75 basis points
Okay.
total this year. So they already cut
Mm-hmm.
50.
Mm-hmm.
So there could be another
Mm-hmm.
25 to 50 basis points
I
more
see.
because the Fed based on the assessment by the Fed officials as of March 19, there was already some tariffs by Trump. The Fed could still cut by 50 basis points this year, another
Mm-hmm.
50 basis points next year, and 25 basis points by 2027. That's a
Okay.
total of 125 basis points.
Uh,
And
mm-hmm.
the central
Mm-hmm.
banks around the world, like the BSP, could follow that to maintain the healthy interest rate differential. So that would be our movement. That would be the direction going forward
All
for
right.
interest rates. And that's
Well,
good news if
Mike. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
borrowing costs would go down further because it would mean cheaper
Mm-hmm.
for businesses to borrow, cheaper for consumers to borrow to purchase cars, houses, to spend, and other investments, and for other institutions, including the government. It's cheaper for them to
I
service
see.
their debt.
Okay. All
It
right,
would lower
Michael.
the debt service.
Yeah. Okay. So to us Filipinos, why does this rate cut matters?
Well, definitely, it's good because the impact, well, it's positive. That's why, before the Trump factor, everybody else was excited about the rate cuts. Before the Trump factor emerged, we saw the best levels in the stock market, 7,600. So everybody was ecstatic. The peso was at 55.45. That was the best last year. And the bond yields went down. The 10-year bond yield went down to as low as 5.64. But when the Trump factor came in, so we saw losses in the markets. Suddenly, the local stock market is down to 6,100 from 7,600. It's down already by 20% also, similar to the US from the peaks. And interest rates, well, the bond yields went up a bit. Now it's doing
Mm-hmm.
around 6.18 from 5.64. So there was this Trump premium also because the US yields also went up from a low of 3.60. Now it's doing like 4.40. So the Trump factor is there. The dollar peso is doing now at 57.18, less than 57.20. So from 55.45, but nonetheless, it's better than the record high of 59 that we last saw November to December of last year. So rate cuts would help the economy by reducing the borrowing cost for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be expansionary for the economy. And that would also be favorable for our financial markets. So
Okay.
that would support the stock markets, the bond markets, and
Mm-hmm.
the economy per se. So that's why they call it expansionary monetary policy whenever they cut interest rates, because it's really meant to expand the economy since inflation locally is under control. But the thing is, if US would have some challenges on inflation because of the higher Trump tariffs, it may limit the ability of the US central bank to cut rates. And therefore, the rest of the world would follow that. And even us, we cannot preempt, we cannot be ahead of the US central bank in cutting rates. We just have to follow them to maintain the healthy interest rate differential, just like what the other central banks around the world are doing. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's the Trump tariffs, that presents another challenge because it's gonna slow things down around the world. It is making trade, it's making exports to the US more expensive from the point of view of many countries. So let's see if that 10% for 90 days would be maintained. Would there be negotiations in between to bring down the respective tariffs of different countries, and or would the reciprocal tariffs be reinstated again? But bottom line, even the 10%,
Uh-huh.
that would still increase the cost of Americans.
I see. Okay.
Whenever they import products from all over the world, they
Mm-hmm.
have to pay 10% more.
Okay.
And that
All
could
right.
lead to higher inflation, and that could slow down,
All right,
world
Michael.
trade.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I can see that inflation and rate cut upon discussing this matter connect connected to each other or intertwined to each other. So, given this connection, so do we expect another round of rate cut for this year?
Yeah, looking at the Philippine fundamentals, no problem on inflation. They may cut, they may go ahead and cut some more. Yeah, that's the guidance, the signals from our local monetary officials.
And of
Total
course, we have
cuts
a
of
low inflation
50
rate
to set.
this March, Michael.
Yeah, it's low. It's 1.8%. It's even lower than the central bank's target of 2 to 4%. So, that's the acceptable band. It fell below that. So, meaning to say, there's urgency to cut rates to stimulate the economy to prioritize growth. Because there's some slowdown in growth because of the impact of inflation in recent years. So there's a need to boost economic growth since anyhow inflation is already under control. Because yeah, that's the role of the central banks. When they raised rates 3 years ago, to past 2 to 3 years, so that's their mandate. They would do everything to ensure price stability. Now, mission accomplished on that. They have successfully done that. They
Mm-hmm.
have slowed things down, the demand, they have slowed down the demand, they have brought down commodity prices as a
Mm-hmm.
result to the lowest in 3 to 4 years, especially oil and many other major commodities. So inflation is under, even rice. Rice is at the lowest in more than 3 years, the world price. So,
Mm-hmm.
plus the other non-monetary factors, the 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 interventions made, like the reduction in the import tariffs on rice to 15% from 35% since July. So that all helped to bring down inflation, and
Mm-hmm.
they have all the leeway that they have right now
I
to cut
see.
interest rates. It just happened that to maintain the healthy interest differentials, we may need to wait for further cuts by the U.S. Central Bank.
I see.
And
Okay.
and we're still hoping because
Mm-hmm.
the Fed officials, based upon their assessment, just like a little more than a month ago, or no, it's even less than a month ago. It was March 19. They're still in the position to cut rates by 50 basis points.
Okay.
And if they would have to assess first the impact of Trump, because Trump is so unpredictable
I
in
see.
his policies. He's like you know especially now the escalating trade war between US and China.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're retaliatory in nature. So imagine, it only started April 2, the tariff on China 34%.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because China retaliated, because it's the warning of Trump, the Trump administration. If they retaliate, they're gonna escalate.
I see.
If they don't retaliate, that's already the maximum at 34. But they retaliated. China said,
Uh-huh.
okay,
Right.
we will do it. We'll match it 1:1, tit for tat. They always do that actually. That's their track record. Even
Uh-huh.
during the first Trump administration, they raise it. Eventually, US said, okay, we'll raise it to 104%. Then
Mm.
China also raised 85% the following day. Then suddenly, the next day, 125%
Mm.
import tariff on China by Trump. Then suddenly, China said, okay, they're gonna, well, yeah, and now the escalation
Mm.
continues.
Okay.
As of today, it's
Mhm.
already
All right,
145%.
Michael.
So,
Okay. Given the Trump's unpredictability towards economy, so does Trump tariff may affect the future policy rate cut?
indirectly, because of the indirect effect on the US economy, the world economy, and the supply chains. We could be indirectly affected because of the impact on the US economy, because US is the world's biggest economy.
Mm.
The trade war with China. China is the world's second biggest economy. The two biggest economies, they're clashing right now, intensifying the trade war. That's why the markets corrected lower because of that. you know, it would, if an
Mm.
American would buy something made from China,
Mm-hmm.
a product from China, they may not now have to pay 145% tax. So it's because of that, in just a matter of days, it has gone up, it escalated tremendously. And you know, yeah, it's expensive. So there are many products sold by China in the US. If you go to the stores there, a lot of made in China.
I
Even
see.
Apple, a lot of them are made in
Okay.
China. The
All right,
phones, and there are
Michael,
many
my
other.
my last question, sorry. Okay, my last question for this discussion for today. So, what is your forecast on rate cut? Is it higher than 25 basis points or lower?
Well, total for the rest of the year, another 25 basis points. That's possible, and maybe a total of additional 50 basis points for the rest of the year. So that's consistent with the signaling by our local central bank officials, local monetary officials, because they already cut yesterday by 25. So another 25 to another 50 total. And that's also consistent with what the US Central Bank officials are saying or are assessing also. They may cut a total of 50 basis points this year because they have yet to do a cut this year. So if they cut total of 50 basis points, so we would match that. So that's on the high side, 50 basis points total for the rest of the
I
year.
see.
And
Okay.
that would be good for the economy because the priority is stimulating the economy. It's gonna slow the tariffs. Trump's tariffs are gonna slow things down, slower global trade, slower global investments, slower employment, and that would slow down economic and business activities worldwide. Although the Philippines may be affected, but not that much because Philippines is the biggest market of the Philippines export market is the US 17%, but
Okay.
the Philippine exports, the contribution to the economy is not that huge. The exports of our major ASEAN neighbors are like 3 to 5 times higher. They're more export dependent than us.
I see.
Our exports are not goods. Our exports are services.
All
It's
right. So,
equal.
sorry, Mike, we don't
Yeah.
have much time left, but thank you for joining us in the program, for giving us analysis regarding this 25 basis points that was announced by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. And I hope to have you in the next program or the next episode of this program. Thank you, Michael, for joining us.
Yeah, sure. You're most welcome, Mr. Jerome, and to your viewers. Have a great morning, everyone.
And in the meantime, Front and Center will be right back after these short messages.
Para may maayos na pundasyon para sa kabataang Pilipino, inutos ni Pangulong Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. na magpatayo ng Child Development Centers or CDCs sa mga low-income barangays sa bansa.
These CDCs are venues for the implementation of early childhood care and development center programs and services, especially the early learning programs and family support program. Sa mga center na ito, maaaring makapaglaro, makapagbasa, at makapag-aral ang ating mga kabataan. It can also be used as a resource center for developmentally appropriate learning materials and a laboratory for conducting research, data gathering, and innovations about early childhood.
Pangako ng Pangulo na hindi titigil ang pamahalaan sa pagbibigay ng kinakailangang suporta para sa mga bata dahil sila ang magmamana at magpapatibay naman ng pundasyon ng ating bansa sa hinaharap.
The government continues to find ways to support our children so they can grow, they can thrive, and reach full potential. Through health and community programs, we remain committed to helping them become productive members of our society.
Para sa iba pang mga balita at impormasyon, manatiling nakatuto. Tapat sa pag-uulat. Radyo Pilipinas, Radyo Publiko 738. Radyo Pilipinas World Service Online, reaching you in digital format. Anytime, anywhere. From Manila, Philippines.
You're still watching Front and Center here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. And anytime later, President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. will witness the ceremonial signing of the memorandum order authorizing the National Amnesty Commission to issue safe conduct passes in favor of the amnesty applicants happening in Datu Odin Sinsua town in the province of Maguindanao del Norte. And for background, Safe Conduct Pass is a document issued by the National Amnesty Commission to an applicant for amnesty that protects him or her from arrest, detention, and prosecution for the crimes subject of his or her application. And it guarantees freedom of movement of the applicant while his or her amnesty application is being considered. It does not, however, cover offenses not covered by the amnesty proclamation nor those committed after the issuance of the proclamation. Hence, this is a required document for a rebel returnee that is fed up on fighting and choose to return to the government without getting detained. And in the context of Moro rebels, the total number of Moro rebels applied for amnesty just reached at 344. That's according to the NAC data. And there was no or little known information on the low turnout of rebel returnees. The NAC acknowledged this challenge at least. And in a palace briefing last month, the Amnesty Commission has said that they went to communities with the help from the Office of the Presidential Advisor on Peace, Reconciliation, and Unity, as well as the Philippine National Police and the Armed Forces of the Philippines to find rebel returnees and facilitate its application. And last year, OPAPRO Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. welcomed the NAC's issuance of the implementing rules and regulation for the Amnesty Proclamations number 403, 404, 405, and 406 issued by the President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. that were officially adopted by the body on March 14 of last year. He noted that former rebels who have turned away from armed struggle and laid down their arms will be able to complete their normalization and transition to mainstream society as peaceful, productive, and law-abiding citizens. This, and among other peace initiatives, should be the way to achieve long-lasting peace, not just in the Mindanao region, but the entire country. So stay tuned for that event coming from Maguindanao del Norte. And now we conclude this edition of Front and Center together with Radyo Pilipinas World Series production and technical team. This is your host, Jerome Toledo. Until next time, mabuhay, love the Philippines.
You have just heard and watched
Front and Center.
Front and Center. Join us again for another edition here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Front and Center.